Ladies and gentlemen, if I could invite you to take your seats, we will be getting started here momentarily. It's actually a great pleasure to invite people to take their seats as opposed to simply announcing to a lot of boxes on the screen that we're going to be starting now. I would like to welcome not only all of you who are here in person, but all of those boxes on the screen. I know there are a lot of you in the virtual world joining us for this event, and it is a great pleasure to welcome both sets of people here today. This is a joyous occasion for multiple reasons. It is bringing back one of our distinguished alums to talk about issues that are extremely current and burning today. It is also a celebration of the School of Public Policy's 40th anniversary, and this is a part of our 40th anniversary series. We've been looking back at what we have done and who we have educated over the last 40 years as a way of looking forward to the next 40 years of what this school needs to be able to do and the kind of skills and knowledge that we need to be able to impart to future policymakers, all of you and beyond. So today we have multiple reasons for being here. I did want to start by noting that we have an incredibly long tradition in this school of producing very distinguished women in security policy area. And not only will our speaker give us a very real sense of that today, I wanted to start by acknowledging one of the main reasons why we have such a strong history in training people not only in security policy, but in particular women in security policy. And that is our distinguished early faculty member, Catherine Gallagher, who was a founder of the CISM in 1985. She was a faculty member in 1982, one of the very first faculty members of our school. Catherine has kind of done it all, and I know she's joining us online. So Catherine, this is for you. This is a way to celebrate your incredible legacy, not only in welcoming our distinguished guest today, but also all of us around the topic we'll be discussing today. Catherine not only came to this school early on, she embodied the scholar practitioner that we are known for. We are known for creating practitioner scholars and scholar practitioners, and Catherine was really both throughout her career. She served on the National Security Council staff, the Department of Defense staff, and Catherine not only innovated in her policy role, she innovated in her institutional role here, not just in creating CISM, but in creating the Women in International Security Network, which I think has left a broad and deep legacy in the security field. So Catherine, welcome for joining us online here. You are the reason we're all here. Let me turn to introduce Ellen McCarthy, our speaker today. Ellen is the chair and CEO of Truth in Media Cooperative and Noodle Labs. I love the title, Noodle Labs. So I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more about both entities. Ellen is the former Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of Intelligence and Research. And for those of you that don't know either the intelligence community or the State Department, INR is a gem within the State Department that adds significant analytical capacity to our diplomatic establishment, but it also goes both ways as a member of the intelligence community. It brings a lot of the diplomacy and international affairs into the analytical side of the intelligence community. So INR that Ellen very ably led is an incredibly important institution, maybe small within the intelligence community and within the State Department, very influential. In addition to her various roles throughout her career, she's been in the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence Office, Director of Intelligence Operations Strategy and Policy for the Coast Guard. Ellen knows her way around government. She also very much knows her way around the boardroom. She is a board advisor for SAP NS2, Fortum Technologies, Exeger, Babel Street. Some of our students might know all of these companies. Okay, I saw some nodding heads. That's good. I've only heard of some of them. So I think it's safe to say that Ellen has been innovating in both the public sector throughout her career, but also in the private sector, and that interface is a very important part of what we hope to hear about today. Ellen, I think, was not only a student of Catherine Kelleher's, but she also took a page from Catherine's playbook of innovating. In 2016, Ellen co-founded the Amazing Women of the Intelligence Community, or AWIC, which is a grassroots organization that is dedicated to the professional development of women serving in the U.S. national security mission. So the tradition, Catherine, is in very good hands. Thank you, Ellen, for joining us here today, and thank you all for joining us. We are in for a treat.
Hello, everybody. It is so good to be here. So what am I going to talk about? I know I have about 45 minutes, and then we're going to have time for questions. And please, I'm going to try and not take my full 45, because I'd rather hear your questions, so you can ask anything. I'm going to talk a little bit about me, a lot more about the intelligence community and INR. And Dinor, you gave us a great setup. And then what I love about being here now, Vice, 2 years ago, is because I'm out of government, I can actually be a little more open about sort of what I think, how things have changed in my time across government, and what I think needs to change as we look forward. And as you all build this great building, maybe some things that maybe you can help us with in the intelligence community. But before I go there, I really need to say thank you. I mean, I have to say, I have to thank the University of Maryland School of Public Policy, which I still in my brain is embedded as a School of Public Affairs, even though I like public policy better, for sticking with me when I was there, for sticking with me today, and actually for sticking with me ever since the day I graduated. I owe this program so much. I'm really not just saying that. And so to you students sitting out there, I hope you have that same experience. I'll tell you, the first thing I learned was the value of serving. With incredible role models like Dr. Keller, who's on right now, but others like Michael Knott, Alan Schick, Peter Brown. I mean, these were folks that really just sort of left this indelible mark on me, and I carry them with me every day. I made some incredible friendships. I mean, probably some of my, even closer than my college experience. One person who's on right now is Linda Staley. So I've got to give a shout out to Linda Staley, one of the co-founders of WISE. She became my best friend, my mentor. She's my son's godmother. So Linda is one. I mentioned a little bit ago, there's another student who I actually met when I was speaking at a class, Jill Lau, who after class came over and talked to me. She wanted to give back to a country that gave her and her family from Vietnam so much. And she's now an officer in the United States Navy, an intel officer. And this program created Jill, and she's just doing phenomenal things. But it's also, this program prepared me for an incredible career in national security. And again, Dinor, you mentioned it, because it wasn't just, and I think that's what sets this program apart, by the way. It wasn't just about the policy, or in the intel community, the mission. So it wasn't just the substance of what we were focused on, whether it was Germany or the Soviet Union, but it really was the business, the operations of government, which I will tell you is, I think, what helped me set myself apart from some of my colleagues across the IC. So understanding the budget and the role of Congress and OMB, understanding the importance of developing people and promoting people and sort of that human capital element, And also just the requirement side. What do we need to do to get better? What's a strategy? How do you connect strategy to budget, to human development? And, I think those were the things that were almost more valuable than in some ways just understanding the mission side of the house. But the last thing I learned, and was as important as the substance, was the value of your network. I learned that in addition to working really hard and being an expert at what you do, that these connections, the students you're in class with, the people who come in and visit class and say something that you find intriguing, and you follow up with them, and then keeping that network going throughout the course of your career is really, it's almost as critically important as just being smart at what you do or at your trade craft. And as you mentioned, Dean, I did take a page from Kathleen Kelleher's book with WISE. I participated in WISE, and then I realized that in the intelligence community, we need the same sort of focus and same sort of effort. And so the Amazing Women of the IC, which is still a very grassroots organization, started as 40 women in my living room about 4 or 5 years ago, and is now about 3,000 women. And it's women who work in and around the IC. For any of you interested, I'm happy to share that information with you. Please come on. We're a club, but a club that was very much needed, and one that I'm very grateful is there. Okay, so now I'm going to transition just a little bit about me. Not a lot, but the reason I'm going to highlight this is because I will say that pretty much every step of the way it came from lessons I learned here. I came to this program as a freelance reporter for the Capital newspaper in Annapolis, Maryland. And I will tell you, I would love to say that I had this incredible desire to serve. And that really wasn't the case. I really just wanted a golden retriever, a house, and a boat on the Chesapeake Bay. That was pretty much what my needs were, and anything that was going to get me those things were going to be good enough. But it really was a person. It was the publisher of the Capital newspaper, who was friends with Dean Michael Nacht at the time. I was talking to the publisher, and he said, this program in Maryland just looks really interesting, Ellen. I think you'd like it. And so literally I met with Michael Nacht. I hadn't even taken the GMAT yet. I think in those days I started before I had even done all the paperwork to get on board. That's how small and new this program was. But I'll tell you that it didn't take very long to have everything change, because even then I was surrounded by these people who just had this incredible desire to serve their country, to help their country. It changed me very, very quickly. And I'll tell you that it was actually during that second year, when I think you still are required to do some sort of an internship and then write your thesis. It was then that I was working for the Institute for Defense Analysis and was writing this paper on depressed trajectory ballistic missiles as a countermeasure to the Strategic Defense Initiative. Why I find this so shocking is that a year and a half earlier I had been writing about birds in the Eastern Shore. And so now I'm talking about depressed trajectory ballistic missiles, and actually kind of understood what I was talking about. And it came from this program and that experience. But I will tell you that it was that internship matched with the passion of the students that I had now developed very close friendships with, that really helped me understand how important it is to give back. And so this thesis ended up with a job tracking Soviet submarines at the Office of Naval Intelligence. The hunt for Red October was kind of big at that point. I will tell you that in my mind, though, I was one of these people that thought, I'll do it for a couple years and then I'll go back and get the dog and the boat on the bay. But of course, the minute I walked into ONI, and this is I tell everybody who goes into the intelligence community, you never 1 minute in and you're never going to go back. You're never going to retire. You will always you'll always have this passion to continue to support that community. Just a quick walk down memory lane. Soviet submarine analyst, where I spent my days briefing the Chief of Naval Operations and the Director of Naval Intelligence on the movement of Soviet submarines. Isn't it funny how that was so passé just 2 years ago, and how today, Soviet submarines or Russian submarines are kind of back. So what's old is back. I decided that I was tired of writing things for people and briefing people and having no idea where it was going. And so I moved down to Norfolk, Virginia, where I started briefing submarine operators. And that was far more satisfying to me because you'd actually tell them something and what came back was something. You know, either you helped me or you didn't help me. And I found that very satisfying. Actually, I loved that. I loved that. That's not to say that being in D.C. and doing strategic level intelligence is not cool. It just wasn't as fun for me. Did that for a couple of years, moved back to D.C. because the Cold War was over. Submarines were no longer interesting. Actually, they were, but it wasn't as big a deal. It was the peace dividend. It was the early 90s, sort of things had changed, and the Coast Guard offered me this opportunity. I had friends who said, why would you leave Navy to go work for the Coast Guard? They don't shoot anything. And it was like the end of the Cold War, but we were doing the war on drugs, and I was looking at them like, are you flipping serious? I mean, the Coast Guard's shooting way more stuff than the Navy is right now. And that's exactly true. We were doing counter-drug operations and law enforcement operations. And this woman came in to start running this program. Her name was Fran Townsend. Again, this gets to timing is a little bit of everything. And she said, Ellen, you got to help me get this organization into the intelligence community. And so I got to spend a lot of time focused on getting the Coast Guard in to become one of the members of the IC. The reason I share this with you is she would have never given me this task had it not been for what I learned at the School of Public Affairs. It's the role of Congress. How does Congress help? What does the budget mean? You know, how to require? I mean, it was all that other stuff that really helped me work Congress, work OMB, worked then the Director of Central Intelligence. And so, you know, all these things are about things I learned from this program. Would go to the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence to help them stand up this new program. And while there, I got to set up a whole new personnel system called the Defense Civilian Intelligence Personnel System, going to the people side, set up a new budget category called the Military Intelligence Program, or the MIP. Would leave government to run a nonprofit called INSA, the Intelligence and National Security Alliance. For those of you interested in working in the national security sector, I would highly encourage you to go to their website and join. They provide a platform for the private sector and the intelligence community to come together and deal with big problems. I did it very late in my career, and I wish I had done it earlier in my career. They have dinners, and there's papers that they develop. There's all sorts of things going on. So if intelligence is something you're interested in, I would encourage you to consider INSA. Got called back to government to run this organization called the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA, one of the big collection agencies. They provide all imagery and imagery analysis and support to the federal government. Would leave again to run an R&D company, subsidiary company to Noblus, formerly an offshoot of MITRE. Had it not been my time at IDA, perhaps that wouldn't have been an option. Again, thank you, University of Maryland. But got to do some R&D, some technology development in the cyber world, and then got called back to INR. I'm going to highlight that my call back to INR was in a political capacity. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. I didn't go to INR because I'm even remotely political. I came back to INR because it was a chance to run one of the 17 intelligence elements. So, you know, I was sitting with directors of major agencies. And I will tell you that had it not been for this program, and had not been for all those other experiences, I am positive that would have never happened. And it really gets to understanding what you're passionate about from a mission perspective, but don't underestimate the importance of understanding the role of Congress, the private sector, and people. Just critically important. Other thing that I wanted to highlight is that moving around the IC, so this was not exactly the norm in those days. So you tended to go to an agency and you stayed. So for example, CIA, you know, you went to CIA and you never left CIA. You know, you drank the Kool-Aid, and it's kind of a part of their culture today, but I wasn't. I think it was the ADD and the Golden Retriever that I kept moving around, and I'm very glad to see that you now can do that today. You know, you can, it's just so much easier to move around the community. I mentioned that I left government. I would highly encourage some of you to consider private sector service, because right now, especially in this digital age of ours, there's just so much you can do that actually helps us as a country that is best done in the private sector. I'll address that a little better. But I will tell you, I also believed in my movement around. Another thing that this program taught me is the role of the civil service and the senior executive service. So again, it gets to that servant concept, that our job as a civil servant or a senior executive servant is to help fix things, to help drive things, to make things better for the American people. And I really bought into that idea. And so that was a reason why, as I saw a new opportunity, if it looked like fun, if it looked like it was going to sort of check that box on trying to make something better or fixing it, that's what I did. It was a little different back in the 90s, but the good news is today it's much easier to do that, although not as easy as it should be. So that leads me to, I want to talk a little bit about INR. I'm going to talk about the IC, but I really want to talk about INR because while I worked at 6 of these 17 agencies and worked with all of the agencies, I really do believe that INR was the most incredible opportunity I was ever given because I'd worked law enforcement, I'd worked defense operations, I had never worked the policy, the diplomacy side of the house. And if I have one regret, I probably would have gone there much, much sooner because it's just so fascinating. And I think it's because law enforcement and defense, they're kind of like sciences. You know, you're telling somebody that there's, you know, Osama bin Laden is behind the door. You know, it's kind of yes or no. But diplomacy is an art. It's so broad. You know, it's not just dealing with world leaders. It's dealing with all segments of society. And, you know, intelligence is but one source that actually informs diplomacy based on a whole lot of other sources of information or personal relationships that actually go into the development of policy or diplomatic efforts. And so it's kind of fun from an intel side because, you know, lots of times, you know, the diplomat or the policymaker doesn't want to hear what you have to say. In fact, a lot of times they don't want to hear what you have to say. But that means it's sort of challenging because now you have to think of ways to make sure that they're considering what it is that you know to be true, even to people that don't always want to hear it. And it can be a little scary, but I found it a lot of fun. So about INR. It is one of the now 18 intelligence elements in the intelligence community. I, as the Assistant Secretary, reported directly to Secretary Pompeo, and we actually supported the entire, his team. I'll tell you, I put a lot of focus, not only support to the senior leadership within state, but putting much more in focus those that were out at the missions and the embassies, because I really believe that they needed to hear what INR was saying. And so I'll tell you, I put, you know, as long as I could keep Secretary Pompeo happy, and as long as the offices were keeping their bureaus happy, we could put a special focus on pushing out the stuff that we were delivering to them, to the embassies, to those around the world. I'll tell you that we're sometimes referred to as the tip of the spear. I think you alluded to that. I think it's because our intelligence successes are just, they're remarkable. I can't talk about all of them, but I can talk about a few. I mean, one academic referred to us as the mouse that roared, and that's absolutely the case. And it's because we're one of the smallest, but I think it's because we're one of the most impactful. And I know I'm biased, but I think the data shows it. So in 1968, there was actually a report done on State Department and their support to the Vietnam effort, and INR was called out specifically for ensuring that CIA was not going down wrong lanes. I don't mean to insult my CIA counterparts, but in this case, they really were going down the wrong lane, and talk about Indochina's ability to escalate in ways that the rest of the community weren't. So INR was held out as being critical to our effort in Vietnam. In 1973, INR predicted the Arab-Israeli War 5 months before it actually happened. In 2002, of course, this is probably, y'all are probably familiar with this, INR was the only intel element that actually dissented on a national intelligence element that actually laid out where Iraq was in producing weapons of mass destruction. And so we were a footnote in that NIE. We actually had people who were almost fired because of that dissent, but it was INR was the only one. And while there's so many other examples, I wish I could tell you, these are the ones that are declassified. There are a couple of other data points that I think are kind of important to consider. Is that the President's daily briefing is, of course, a briefing that is provided by the intelligence community, mostly the Central Intelligence Agency, to the President every morning. INR produces more articles that go into the PDB, the Presidential Daily Brief, per capita than CIA or DIA. So again, 200 analysts produce more articles that go into the Presidential Daily Brief than CIA or DIA, organizations of 20 and 15,000 respectively. So that just says something about you know, how good they are and how resilient they are, because working the process to get an article into the PDB is it's like getting struck by lightning. It's just, it's so incredibly impossible getting articles into the PDB, and yet INR seems to have the the magic. And just another little specific data point, when I was at INR, I'll talk a little bit more about our Office of Opinion Research, but they predicted the outcome of one of Netanyahu's 50 elections by 0.098% before there was even a blue and white party. That's just how good they are. And so that's why I am so bullish about this thing called INR, because I really believe that the rest of the IC should take a page from the INR playbook, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So why are they so good? Well, first thing is their size. Small really is good. I'm going to say the IC is just way too big. I'll give you reasons why. But size is, we are 300 by around 21,000 at CIA, give or take a couple thousand, which means that by being small that we can pivot really quickly. There's lots of data, there's lots of information out there. So if we need to move from, say, China to Russia, we can do that pretty quickly, much more quickly than, say, a larger agency. We're better poised, we have a better experience leveraging the other IC agencies. And for the reality is that because we're so small, we know where to get that intelligence, that information that we can't develop ourselves, or we're better poised to drive collections than others are because of our size. INR analysts are better trained at working with open source data than, say, the other agencies. My time at NGA, it didn't matter that 70% of our imagery was commercially acquired. Analysts at NGA only wanted to work with data that was acquired by national technical means, which I just found crazy. But because there was this belief that data was better. It's not. We are incredibly integrated with our client. We actually so the analysts and the intel officers at INR actually interact with the policymaker, the bureau, every day. They're on the phone with folks out in the mission every day. And that's not the case at CIA and DIA. At CIA, your analysts sit in McLean, and at DIA, they sit out in Bolling Air Force Base. And a funny story about this, I remember as I was leaving INR, I was talking to some of my friends at CIA, and I said, if I come back as the Director of National Intelligence, I'm going to take every analyst at CIA, and I'm going to have them flood the halls of the State Department, because they so need, we need those analysts to come in. They should sit in the offices with every bureau. And my friend said, well, they won't come, Ellen. She was a very senior, she actually ran analysis, and she said they'll never come because they actually like sitting in McLean, and they actually like doing what they're doing, and they're actually, for them, self-actualization comes from the research, but it's not about the customer, it's not about being out there and informing. They actually like sitting there and doing the reading and studying languages and doing all that, and it's not everybody, but she said, nope, they won't come. But I think that's one thing that sets INR apart. So they understand sort of where the policymaker is going, and that helps them sort of actually, when I tell you, drive the way they deliver the intelligence to actually have an impact. Not to do the policy, but to inform the policy. Agility. I will tell you that I sort of alluded to this a little earlier. Again, if I had it to do again, I probably would have taken the Foreign Service exam. But the depth and breadth of what diplomats do is absolutely amazing. And again, I always thought of diplomacy as, we're now in peace talks with Putin, but it's not that. Most of what these folks are doing every day is they're working with local business, they're working with local communities, they're working with the entertainment industry. Their influence is, the role of diplomacy is incredibly broad, and it's gotten broader and broader and broader as we finally realize that economy and climate and health are all interweaved into what national security really is, and that's the diplomat's day. And so that means that INR also needs to be there to inform that in ways that I just didn't see at the Office of Naval Intelligence or the Defense Intelligence Agency. A larger apparatus spends more time preparing for a new issue. And even when they're not preparing for a new issue, actually providing intelligence to your customer can sometimes take forever in larger organizations. We call it the chop chain. But I remember times where I would write something and it would take 2-3 weeks to actually get it to the person that actually needed it, because it had to go through an incredible review process. When you're small and you have this relationship with your client, you just write it and you give it to them, and there's this trust because you all know one another, and so it's a lot more fun. A chop chain is no fun. Anybody who's ever spent any time at the Pentagon trying to work policy, it takes forever to coordinate on policies, and that can be kind of a drag. being small helps with groupthink. So the IC, the intelligence community, has been hit over and over, the NIE on weapons of mass destruction, with sort of everybody falling onto one side of an issue because there's so many voices, and when they all start the same, your biases, your instinct is to say, well, if they think it's this, I must think it's this. At INR, with so few people, that's not the case. You typically have just one person. You're one deep in a function or a region, so your voice matters. And you're not as likely going to be inspired by others because there's nobody else who's working this like you are. And the other thing is, for those of you who know State Department, they have an incredible culture of just disagreeing. You know, I used to laugh because I would hear, during the Trump administration, I'd hear about the deep state at State Department. And I'll tell you, at least from my experience, I never saw it. What I saw is the State Department is a culture of dissenters. They just don't, I mean, if you ask any Foreign Service officer who their favorite secretary is, you're never going to hear the same one, except for, actually, they loved Colin Powell, because he built a mall in the basement of State Department. He's also an incredible man. And George Shultz, they loved him too, because he made sure that nobody at State Department ever had to be polygraphed. But for the most part, they don't, their culture is one of they're critical thinkers. And they don't think anybody is ever got it completely right. And that culture is certainly part of what INR is. They're very proud of being the dissenters. They like taking, State Department invites dissent, and INR is with them. So my last point on size, though. While I say small is good, INR is too small. And so I always thought when I came to INR that they were small by design, and I realized they weren't small by design. They were small by mismanagement. So just to give you a little data point, INR is the oldest civilian all-source intelligence organization in the intelligence community. Everybody thinks it's CIA. It's not. It's INR. In 1945, this group called the Office of Strategic Services disbanded. There's a long, interesting story there. I would love to tell it to you because I find it fascinating, because it really gets to how bureaucrats don't like, you know, bureaucrats are only comfortable with bureaucrats, but when you have outliers like Wild Bill Donovan, they all want to eat him alive. And that was sort of the OSS. When Roosevelt died, Truman, the other T president, said we had to disband the OSS because he just wasn't willing to hear all the complaining about Wild Bill. But Wild Bill was able to convince Truman that we keep this one group, 1,300 researchers from the OSS who came to State Department. Interestingly enough, State Department didn't want them because they said things that the State Department didn't want to hear. So over time, people left. In fact, that's how CIA got stood up. The CIA was created 2 years later because it was a bummer working at State Department. So all these amazing folks moved up and stayed and created CIA. But even over the course of INR's 75-year history, it went from 1,300 to now 300 in 75 years. I would like to ask any one of you, what government entity, agency, department, office has ever moved in that direction? Ever? You know, when the intelligence community has expanded by tenfold from my time in. I mean, how has that happened? And I appreciate that they're great purveyors of the taxpayer dollar, but to me, I know exactly why this happened. It happened because they've had incredible people running INR. They were Foreign Service officers and CIA officers, but it gets back to what I learned at this program. They didn't really care about the budget. They didn't really care about the role of Congress. They just cared about producing the best analysis they could, and that they did. And small is good, but I will tell you, I got in there and I walk around the building and I'd say to them, how's INR doing? And everybody would say, oh, they're doing wonderful. These are diplomats. Oh, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. They're doing great. But it was actually one very brave senior diplomat who said to me, you know, I just don't think they're as integrated as they used to be. And when I looked, I was like, yeah, how could you be as integrated as you used to be when the world is far more complex than World War II, you know, Nazi Germany today than it was back then? And you're still doing things exactly the way you did them back then, you know, in terms of your relationship with the client, very people-based, very paper-based. And so I was actually very worried about how is INR going to continue to do this incredible work that it does with the numbers moving like this. I just didn't see it. And I was never supporting that they should be the same size as CIA and DIA because I think they're way too big. But we should certainly have some sort of strategic framework, and we should certainly have all the tools and the relationships with Congress and OMB, as all the other intelligence elements do, to be able to establish a requirement and fill it. And so just in a nutshell, what was happening was INR is an intelligence element, but it was deriving very little benefit, at least from a resource perspective, from being in the intelligence community. We would do all the stuff that you needed to do in terms of developing your budget or developing requirements, but nobody was sort of had our back on the D&I side of the house. And then within state, if there was $1 to be spent on a policy or an intelligence, it was not going to come to the intelligence office. And you just didn't have, I had phenomenal successors or predecessors, but none of them, that's not how they were geared. That's not how they thought. And again, I thought that because of this program, because I said, well, wait, I know we do great analysis, so I'm not sure I really can provide value there as the new assistant secretary, but I do know that we can, that we should have our own budget. We should fence our budget within the state budget, and we should engage with the D&I to help defend our requirements. We should set a strategy, set the strategy to people and to requirements, and that we should look at all the things that are expected of us and actually set some no-kidding road marks to hit. And so I spent my 2 years really trying to help them with that. And I know that I've left my successor, who actually, Brett Holmgren, a very good guy. I know I left him with this mechanism that wasn't there before, to actually start building a workforce that is aligned to the needs of the department, the needs of the country. So cyber, emerging technologies, gray zone tactics. I mean, there's just so many areas where INR needs to invest. But I have to thank you all for actually giving me the background to be able to try and work that for a couple of years. I also will say that while I was a political appointee, it's very unusual for political appointees to come in and focus inside of an organization. And that's why I'm sharing with you, I was never a political appointee. I'm a civil servant at heart. And so I really wanted INR to be set up to continue to do the things that it's doing. It's done for the last 75 years, much like you, Dean Orr, wants this school to do the things it's been doing for the last 40, for the next 40. The other thing that set INR apart, quality of the workforce. So like the entire IC, like just about every place, people really are what makes something special. But at INR, it's a little different than the rest of the IC. We are small, and we recruit people who tend not to leave. Why would you leave when you get a chance to work every day with the Secretary of State? So on average, they will spend 17 years in their function or region, unlike the rest of the IC, which pretty much over the course of my career has valued generalists. And there's nothing wrong with being a generalist. I'm a generalist. But it's all about producing current intelligence. It's all about being able to move from counter-drug to counter-terrorism to budget and to be able to get smart at it and to do it. But INR, that's not it. They want deep expertise. And so on average, they spend 17 years. People literally die at their desks. Nobody retires. This gets to once you're in, you never really leave. And so they really are experts at their field. And again, I already talked about proximity to the policymaker. Again, that I think is what sets them apart. And there's a couple unique offices, and then I'm going to be done here. Yes, then I'm going to be done here. Actually, no, I'm not going to be done because I want to talk about what I think needs to be fixed that I think are worth calling out that sets INR apart from CIA or DIA. I mentioned the Office of Opinion Research, OPN. That office has actually been around for about 75 years. It is such a gem that so many folks don't know about. It is a team of methodologists and sociologists and all-source analysts and data analysts. And their job is to create surveys, create polls, and then analyze the data to support the policymaker, which can be very handy when you're going in and trying to establish some relationship with a foreign counterpart. I'm just amazed that the Department of Defense doesn't leverage this office as they're preparing to walk into a country, or even CIA should probably leverage them more as they're walking in to do some sort of covert operation, because these people are really, really good. And by the way, this capability doesn't exist in many, many countries. And by the way, it's all done in the open. Most of what they do, it's open polling. It's not a big secret, but they are right. It's anticipatory intelligence at its finest, and it's all unclassified, and it's almost always right. And it's because it's the right mix of people with soft skills and people with hard skills, so data scientists and methodologists. And, they work with local companies, they develop surveys, they're way better than Gallup. And then they bring that data in, they mix it with the intelligence and with whatever else they're seeing, and they make a projection, and it's really quite good. The other office I want to call out is that the geographer of the United States actually sits at INR, the geographer of the United States. I worked at NGA for 3 years, and then I was amazed at what this little office of just a few cartographers, they also have this other side of it, which is global issues, which is also super cool. But the cartographer of the United States is the one that it leads the committee that does naming for all countries, any border dispute, or when, say, a country wants to build a new island in the South China Sea, they're the ones that actually lay out officially what the boundaries are. Google Maps and Google uses the geography of the United States to establish boundaries. So it's a very small office, but it has a very wide reach. But the other part of it, the global issues side, is also one that I don't think a lot of folks know about, because they're the ones that are working, well, let's say pandemic, COVID. There was a Dr. Erin Keane there who they had hired, and I think you probably know her, Karen. She is this incredible epidemiologist sitting in INR who now is leading the IC's review of the origins of COVID. I understand she's now at the CDC sending up a whole new intel unit to study infectious diseases and pandemics, and that's Erin Keane. Who would have known? It's these people who are working humanitarian issues. They're working climate change, and they are the foremost experts in the intelligence community. I mean, climate change. There's a fellow named Dr. Rod Schoonover who worked in INR, who ultimately left, but he was the IC's preeminent expert in climate change, and he had a rough go of it the last administration. I'm sure you'll find that shocking, but he's still fighting the fight. And I think we'll see him back in government at some point. That makes me happy. So this is where I'm done telling you about INR. I know I should have talked about the rest of the IC, but the reason I focused on INR is because I think it really is an incredible example of what the IC maybe should consider moving forward. And so just a couple of observations. We're not as integrated as we should be. Again, I learned this at INR. There was this guy named Sherman Kent who really believed that intelligence should be separate. In order to be excellent, in order to be amazing, it needed to be separate from the decision makers. So it wouldn't be impacted by policy, or it wouldn't be impacted by the person who had the question. And that made perfect sense in 1945 when intelligence was the only game in town. But we now have explosion of data and insights and tools and capabilities that just didn't exist in 1945. And so I can tell you very confidently that I spent much of my time at INR running down bad data. So if one of our analysts served something up to a policymaker and they didn't like it, they went someplace else and they could get it. Sometimes it was good. Many times it was bad. So misinformation and disinformation affects everybody. And so when you're now in a place where you're trying to actually fight misinformation and disinformation, you're losing. You need to be integrated. You need to be sitting in the room. You need to be writing at a level that is useful to the people who need it. We still, in the IC, write at this top secret SCI level. That's why when I was at INR, I tried to put a focus on pushing information out at the unclassified level. And so, of course, we're not as integrated. If you're writing a top secret document code word and, somebody's worried about the origins of COVID, it's not where they're going to get, they're going to go someplace else to find out what the origins of COVID are. We are too politicized. And I will tell you that I don't believe it's the people in the intelligence community that are politicized. I believe that it is the consumers of intelligence have become so politicized, and it means that there has been this loss of trust. There is always a loss of trust with the intelligence community, so there's been very few presidents who've loved hearing what the daily PDB brief provides them, but it's on a whole new level now. And again, I told you that I came in as a political. I would have come in if it didn't matter who was the president. Just this opportunity to come back and serve and run an intelligence element was incredible. And I will tell you that most of my counterparts are that way. They will serve. It's truth to power, whoever that power is. And I think part of the problem has been you've had a number of senior intel people who've left and they become spokespeople, or they join parties and they join campaigns, and they make it really hard for all the people who are still serving in government or in the private sector serving government. And I think things like having political appointees run intelligence elements is just not the way to go. I mean, I would strongly encourage Congress to consider, moving, setting it forward, set forward some timeframes where, you come in and run an element for 5 years, like FBI, or 7 years. and have the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, and USDI, Undersecretary of Defense Intelligence and Security, they can be political, but have the leads of your intelligence elements be civil servants, just like everybody else, and give them a time frame upon which they serve, and make it more than 2 years, because you can't work a budget or a program or a new initiative or incorporate AI, artificial intelligence, in 2 years. Bless you. You just can't do that. So make it 5 to 7 years. They are way too big, if you didn't hear that. I will tell you, way too big. I mean, just like everywhere in government, when we want to fix a problem, we create a new element, or we bring in new people instead of fixing what you've already got. And so as a result, we've become so bureaucratized. And you know, I will tell you that I have this young woman that I'm mentoring right now. She just left DIA, which makes me so sad. But she was tired of writing things for people that she didn't know who was reading it, how it was being used. And I suggested to her, well, go to OSD and talk to the policy offices that you support. Just meet them, you know, make it a mentoring relationship. She said, I'll get fired. She said, I'm not allowed to talk to my client because if I talk to them, they'll call me all the time and I'll never be able to get my work done. So I went to some of my friends at DIA and I said, is that true? And they said, yes. Like, we've totally lost the big bubble here if you now can't even talk to the people that you're writing for. And so I think a lot of it is because we're just so big. We can, you know, we've got a problem, we can just throw more money at it. And I think, again, this is where I look at the impact INR has had, or I spent some time at Coast Guard Intelligence, and the impact Coast Guard Intelligence has and the value it provides is just incredible. We need more business analytics in the IC. We need to be able to identify what our value is, and you can. Everybody says that you can't measure. It's not true. I think we should serve the American people. I think we should add them to our list of clients. So it's not just diplomacy. It's not just law enforcement. It's not just defense operations. But we were just talking about this a little bit earlier. But in a world of misinformation and disinformation, we need to provide some trusted sources of information. And I know the intelligence community is not exactly trusted right now, but this might be one step to gaining more trust if we added them to the list. The business model, I think, needs to change. We need to have a business model that says we're a content provider, that our job is to provide content. Maybe that's because of my time at the newspaper. But if you actually laid out that your strategic goal is to provide information, you wouldn't get wrapped around the axle about polygraphs or classification. You know, I just heard the new DNI said that our issue is classification. She's absolutely right. But then we'll spend 2 years going through how we declassify, and nothing will ever come of it. If you tell people your job, the way you're going to be measured is getting information to somebody who needs it, you're inspiring people now to think of ways that they can work around policies or help policies or get behind policies to change them to do your job. And so I really believe that if I was the DNI, I'd say our job now is a content provider. And I think we need another Wild Bill Donovan. You know, I alluded a little bit to him, but I think, how do you do that? You know, you hate it when you provide you identify issues and then don't say how to fix it. I think we're so big, it's really hard to fix it. I was working very closely with Sue Gordon, who was the Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence, on maybe making INR that Wild Bill Donovan place. You know, build this parallel path where you make an investment and you're not threatening that's what's going on right now, but you're building an element to work with open source intelligence and push that content out on a lower classification level that's embedded with business analytics so you can see how people are using it and just start down that path. And I think it's going to take another Wild Bill. And I hope that maybe in this administration after the midterms that we see another Wild Bill, because I'm hearing things that are suggesting that that's the kind of thing we need to do. So I think I took exactly 45 minutes. And I didn't talk about anything current. I'll be happy to talk about that because Russia and Ukraine is just incredible. But I did want to talk a little bit about INR in the community, and so thank you for the chance to do it. And, of course, thank you for inviting me here today.
Is this on? So I'm Nancy Gallagher. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Director of CISM, and I just want to thank you very much for both a fascinating and inspiring talk. And you managed to weave together, I think, some things that have become really important themes since you left the school. So it's been fun for me to hear how they sort of, you know, the insistence on looking at both the substance and the process, or thinking about how you can get different private, public, academic, nonprofit sectors all working together on shared policy problems. Hearing that it was there from the very beginning is great. Catherine and I talked a lot about the fact that you were coming today, and she really wanted to be here. She was strategizing and thinking about all the different things she could do to be here. And unfortunately, her health didn't permit it. But I will quickly call out Karen Johnson, who you've already mentioned, is here in part as a representative of WISE, the organization that Catherine founded. And Lindsay Rand and Lauren Samuelson are our two Gallagher fellows that we have. So being able to basically carry on the tradition of supporting and advancing the education of women and men who support the education and advancement of women through the Gallagher Fund. So for those of you who are thinking about how you want to celebrate International Women's Day, which I believe is also International Giving Day, the Gallagher Fund is an excellent way to do it. Right? And there's information over on the table there, or you can just Google Gallagher Fund. But Catherine did know that there was some chance she wouldn't be able to be here in person, and so she pre-positioned a question, which turns out to fit perfectly with what you were talking about. You've probably had more experience in different parts of the intelligence community than most people ever get to have. And so she was really interested in just having you reflect on some of the differences, but I'm going to push it a little bit farther since you specifically called out INR, and I agree with you that it's the part of the intelligence community that I have the most familiarity with, that I have a huge admiration for. But it is focused at least as much on the people as it is on the technology. So how do you think that the information coming from INR can shed, different and perhaps more useful light on a question of the moment, which is what the heck is Putin thinking, and what's he going to do next, and how should we respond to it?
I am so glad she asked that question, because I think that's actually what sets INR apart from some of the other elements. So INR, if you ever get the chance to read, and actually you can read some of INR analysis because some of it's been declassified, it sounds very different than what you read from CIA, DIA, ONI, where you have incredible expertise in the other elements in the community, but they tend to be stovepipes. So you're an expert at missile tubes in Iran, or you're an expert at this. But at INR, they write like it's a story. So the context is woven in, and again, it gets to the 17 years plus that you worked in an area. So you read an INR piece, and it reads very differently than, say, a CIA or DIA piece. And by the way, INR has almost certainly leveraged all those other agencies to develop that piece, but it just, it reads like a story. And so for somebody who is a political, you actually get more value out of it because you understand why something was important. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I'd go to the morning briefing at NGA, and we'd get a briefing on this was happening in the world, and I'd sit there, and I had no idea why this was important. Like, why is it important the Irish Navy has deployed? Why do I care? Or why do I care that this car is there? And you rarely see that at INR. They rarely will write something where you're reading it and you're trying to figure out why it is important, which is why I would so desperately like to be at State Department right now. I mean, I think between Afghanistan and what's going on right now, it's such a fascinating time. And I think that at INR, they also, so many of the agencies actually pivoted towards the war on terrorism, or towards, we were pivoting towards China. But INR sort of maintained its focus on this region of the world and maintained its expertise. It doesn't, State Department, as you're pretty familiar with, the Bureau of EUR was always sort of the preeminent bureau, and it's really solid. And so I just feel like that given what's going on right now, we have just incredible expertise there that understands the history and understands intentions in a way that the rest of government doesn't have it. And so I know the analysts who are working this issue, and I would give anything to be sitting down with them right now to talk about that very question. My sense is now as a private citizen from the outside, I think, first of all, I think what's amazing right now is that intelligence is being played in the open. We've never seen a war like this that is being played in the open. And the reality is that I think this administration, I give them a big thumbs up for, and by the way, it takes incredible courage. And they've had to deal with many of their directors of agencies. So when the President Biden starts declassifying intelligence and reading it on national television, I am positive that Paul Nakasone is having a heart attack, because it's the job of intelligence to protect secrets. I mean, that's part of what I said about what needs to change. Our community is about working in secrets. We protect secrets. And when you have a president that comes in and says, nope, we're going to talk about it, that does compromise maybe sources and methods, but he's willing to take that chance. And that's pretty darn brave from my perspective. So from your perspective, you are actually seeing stuff that is what the intelligence community is providing, which I've got to tell you, when I was at INR, all the time I would read what an INR analyst was writing, and then I would read the compartmented data. And so many times I'd be like, what's the difference? Like, why is this? Why only 10 people can read this, but everybody can read this? So you're really seeing, all of you really have this opportunity to see how this is playing out. The challenge is that misinformation and disinformation piece. And so it was so interesting. I was just with my mom, who was getting surgery in Annapolis, and I was sitting at the mall, and this retired NSA guy at the Starbucks in Annapolis Mall was talking to me about Ukraine and said, my challenge is I'm not even sure if I should believe what I'm reading here in the U.S. And I would say that I think that is a challenge. I do think your trusted media sources, your sort of mainstream media sources, I think are doing a pretty good job of reflecting what's going on. But the challenge is, like with every problem, it's how do you get to the truth? And there are tools out there and there are resources, but it takes time, and most people aren't willing to do that. And so our challenge is now, how do we make sure that the average citizen is reading the things that really are reflecting sort of what's going on? So back to my thought on Putin, we knew this was coming. We saw, even during my time in government, so Nord Stream 2, if you're familiar with the pipeline that Germany had contracted with Russia to move natural gas into Russia, we spent an incredible amount of time focused on Nord Stream 2, and it really was. It was Putin's effort to try and, first, Ukraine is the next big country that produces natural resources. So if you have a pipeline going to Germany and you're now providing Germany with the majority of its natural gas, you're hurting Ukraine. So it was, we've known for a long time that Putin has wanted to have this impact on Ukraine. And what I find very fascinating also about this is but the things he hasn't done to Ukraine. So he hasn't taken down the internet. He hasn't really impacted their economy other than blowing everything up. But my point is, I think from that, he really thought he was just going to walk in and take over this healthy, vibrant country. And because it was the things he didn't do that I think are very telling. So I do think that he did think he was going to walk in and this was going to be a walk in the park. I do think Biden out-information warfared him in terms of getting daily updates on what was going on. I think that's been shocking. I do think that the fact that he was too stuck in his dacha with COVID, just surrounding himself by these oligarchs and these really bad billionaires who were just telling him everything he wanted to hear, I do think all those things were the case. I think the intelligence community got this one right, because we've been saying this for a long time. This is also a good and a bad thing. We're pretty comfortable with that part of the world. So the intel community was able to pivot very comfortably like that in ways that we haven't been able to pivot to areas of the world we're not so comfortable with. So I'll tell you, that's a worry for me right now, because every time we get involved in something like this, we lose our perspective on what others are doing. So what is China doing right now? They had some jets flying over Taiwan the day Russia walked into Ukraine to show everybody that they were still here. I don't believe that China's going to walk into Taiwan, because that's just not that's not how they operate. But I do think they're taking a lot of notes right now, and I do think this is an opportunity to do things while our focus is elsewhere, just like the Belt and Road Initiative when we were fighting the war on terrorism. And that kind of worries me, because we tend to be a country that just sort of pivots to the thing that's big at the moment, and we need to be more strategic and realize the whole world is interconnected, and not to lose your eye on the Middle East and China and other places. So that was a long answer to your question. I wish I was there right now to get exactly what they're thinking right now, but
Thank you.
yeah. Yes. Oh, is somebody else taking the questions? I don't know. You want me to do it, or? Okay, I don't know how this. I have no preference.
And Phoebe, I forgot to tell people where to email their questions. Sorry.
Okay.
Anybody who's listening in right now online and wants to send a question, please email it to schismforum@umd.edu. And Phoebe will be basically collecting those questions and reading them out and sort of alternating between calling on people in the audience and calling or reading out questions that she gets from you.
Thank you so much for being here this evening, or this afternoon. My name
Evening
is
somewhere.
my name is Joshua, and I'm an undergraduate student in the School of Public Policy, which I'm aware wasn't around when you were here, and so I'm also, like the person you mentioned, in Army ROTC, and I will be an infantry and then later military intelligence officer.
Awesome.
And related to the question you just got about the Ukraine. Michael Morrell, the former acting director of the CIA, said in an interview that he would like to see an open source intelligence agency created to put out unclassified information to kind of fight the information warfare so that we can get more truthful and intelligence to the mass public. Seeing how this war in Ukraine is being fought kind of very much in the open and we're not sure where to look, in your opinion, do you think having this sort of intelligence agency would help the kind of information warfare effort, or would it hinder it for future conflicts?
So the way the intelligence community operates right now, it would hinder it. Because, so right now the whole open source discussion has been one that we've been having for about 20 years in the intelligence community. And the issues that arise are ones of privacy and laws. And I mean, I'm not diminishing the importance of privacy and laws, don't get me wrong, but what happens with any big bureaucracy is that they tend to drive what you do as opposed to trying to drive them to give you what you want. So, you know, for example, getting access to open source data is not as easy in the intelligence community. And working with open source data is not as easy when you're in the intelligence community when you look at the way laws are, how policy is developed, how we're organized within. It's just, it's challenging. If you look at the Open Source Center at CIA, it has moved twice. It was an element, first it was FIBIS, the Foreign Broadcast Information Service at CIA. It then transitioned post 9/11 to the ODNI, where it floundered for a while, and now it's back at CIA, and it's still floundering because the community just can't get its head around how it incorporates open source into its day-to-day operations. There's sort of two camps right now on that point. You have one camp that very strongly thinks it should be an INT, like signals intelligence or electric intelligence or human intelligence. I am not in that camp because I think the second you stovepipe it and make it a separate int, you're then spending all your time trying to figure out how to get it out of that stovepipe into the hands of people who need it. And then there's others who are more of my front, which is open source should be where we start our day in the intelligence community. We should start our day with open source intelligence. This is what INR does. And then you add on anything that's additive, anything that's special about the intelligence, you know, the unique intelligence is then incorporated into it. And you start your day writing at the unclassified level, by the way, because if you do that, it's easier to push it out. That gets to that content provider thing. Again, INR does this right now. But that's just not the way we're organized. We tend to work at the high side and then spend all our days moving high-level information down to lower-level information where it's the most useful. You know, Amy Ziegert just wrote a great book on, if you haven't read it, AI, Spycraft. I can't remember the name of it. I just finished it. But it's an incredible, she just put it out. It's an incredible book. And it highlights that, you know, the irony is within the intelligence community, like 80% of what's worked with, or 90%, she gives a number, it's a crazy number, is stuff that you're already reading. But for whatever reason, we can't get around sort of all the policies, all the laws, all the privacy issues, all the concerns to actually, you know, effectively or in any timely manner incorporate it into the workflow within the IC. And I will tell you that I spent a long time working with Sue Gordon saying INR, and by the way, I had CSIS John Hamry on board. He wrote a paper. INR should be the foundation for your open source element and make it half state, half IC, you know, make it a hybrid almost, because then you can leverage authorities that from each side. And Sue was completely on board with this, and so was Mike Morrell for that matter. I mean, you have a lot of really incredible thought leaders who think we need to do something like this, but I think the second you put it inside, so DIA, for example, right now is the lead for open source within the Department of Defense, and I'll give DIA kudos because they are way far out in front of so many others, but it's just not going to happen in a timely manner. I mean, I kind of feel like the digital age has bypassed the community anyway because of acquisition requirements and acquisition laws. So we have missed out on so many tools and capabilities that would help us do things faster and better and easier because of just the bureaucracy of the community. I hate to be such a downer, but I do agree with Mike completely. I think it should be outside. I think it should be outside the IC.
Thank you so much for your answer.
And it could be in the private sector, which I'll be happy to talk about later. So.
Okay, we have a question from Matt Regan, who's a PhD candidate here at SPP, and he wants to know, besides the political appointment of leadership, what else can be done to help depoliticize the consumption of intelligence products by political leadership?
So, again, going back to Sherman Kent, he was always really concerned that the the analysis would be very persuaded by the policy person. If you sat them down together, if you sat them in a room together, the intel would be skewed. But I'll tell you, at INR, I didn't see that. There's been times, like with North Korea a few years ago, there was times we were accused of that. But I'll tell you that the line between policy and intelligence is incredibly important, but it doesn't have to be quite so thick. So in INR, that line is pretty thin. And it's because you need to understand where the policymaker's head is at, but you also have to have the backing of your leadership and the training to know that your job is to give them your best. Your tradecraft is critically important, and you give them the best insight, no matter where their head is at. So you're not trying to feed the narrative that they're espousing. You are giving them the best that you've got, knowing that your leadership has your back if it goes ugly, and it sometimes does, or that you are actually rewarded for actually continuing to try and deliver this content, and maybe in different ways. So you're rewarded for actually getting intelligence incorporated into a policy document or into a decision maker's hand, not the they don't care about this, so I'm just going to go back to my desk and continue doing what I'm doing. So I think that's one way. I've got to tell you, I didn't see, and I've spent 30 years in this community, and in my last job, I got to work with the other directors of the other agencies, and I will tell you that never once did I see them say, we're not going to give something to the president or to the Secretary of Defense, that we're not going to do something. Gina Haspel is the director of CIA. I never heard her say, we're not going to do this because I don't like them. And yet that seems to be the shtick that we've got right now, and I've been around, I haven't seen it. So I do think we need to encourage our leaders as they're leaving to stop, standing up at podiums and saying she's a liar, or, stop. I mean, the reality is that as an intelligence officer, especially somebody like Mike Morrell, who I think is an incredible example of this, you are representing our community, whether you're in or you're out. And so be very aware of what you say and what you do, because there's a lot of people inside and in the private sector who are trying to support this incredible mission of ours. And if you're not helping gain the trust of politicals, if you're out there saying, she's a liar, get her out of here.
Hi, my name is Ryan. I'm a second-year SPP student here at the master's program. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how INR might have relationships with other intelligence community organizations around the world, and like how that might differ, contrast, or
I love that you asked that question. I
from
love it.
like other organizations.
Thank you for going there. That was a brilliant question. And it's not just INR, by the way. So it's really interesting. All of the agencies have their own unique relationships with. Not just, so we talk about the Five Eyes, which tend to be our the Five Eyes are our friends that everybody knows about. So it's the UK, it's Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So it's the folks you think about. But the reality is that we have intel relationships with pretty much countries that you wouldn't even believe we have intel relationships with because we don't have diplomatic relationships with. And each agency sort of has a different set of relationships. So at NGA, we would leverage other countries' satellite capabilities. At INR, we have incredible access to to other countries' intelligence capabilities. And I think we need to leverage them more. So right now, the way that relationship works at INR is it tends to be, you know, it's almost just by, it's not easy. It's by agreement. It's an internship. It's somebody comes over and sits with INR for a few months, or we go over to them. We haven't gotten to the point yet, which is really sad. We're actually sharing production responsibilities. Other agencies in the IC are much better at this. So, you know, if you're in Southeast Asia and you are, you know, you're Australia, you're Canada, you're Australia or New Zealand, you know, you probably have better insights into what's happening in that part of the world. Why can't we actually leverage them and actually use them? If you're in Estonia, you may know a little bit more about what's going on in Eastern Europe than we do at a level that we don't. Why can't we incorporate that information into our assessments? And right now it's very happenstance in terms of how that happens. But I would love, and especially if we move more to an open source realm, why not leverage those relationships? But we just have still not, even with the Five Eyes, we still haven't gotten there. I'll tell you, when I was at NGA, I almost had all of our HUMINT turned off. This was actually when Mike Morrell was in, because I decided to let some of our Five Eyes partners, I was the chief operating officer, so I was like, what the heck, you know, we'll give them access to the entire building. Because I knew that we had facilities in Denver where they were sitting side by side with all the other elements, so I thought, well, you know, they're at NGA, why not give them access to the entire building? And CIA went apoplectic, and they almost cut off all HUMINT sharing with NGA. It was not a good day. Had to do a lot of apologizing that day, but it just shows you that we still have not figured out how to incorporate our friends and partners into the way we do production, and yet we really need to. This gets to, instead of pivoting to Russia, let's ask somebody else to keep an eye on someplace else. And getting to your private sector question, by the way, this really got to me. So I'm at INR, we're now looking at China, we're not looking at other parts of the world. I get calls from ambassadors saying, why aren't I seeing this anymore? And I had to tell them, because we're not doing that anymore, we're doing China. And I kept thinking, you know, my husband works at Deloitte. I know he has an office building in that city. Like, why can't I go to Deloitte and ask Deloitte to help with this? Like, I know they have relationships there. Why can't I ask Deloitte to get that picture? Why can't I ask Deloitte to talk about what they're hearing or seeing? You know, why is it that we just stop doing something? Why aren't we leveraging them? Why aren't we coming up with creative ways to fill gaps in our knowledge by using our friends and partners and using the private sector? I don't get it. So.
We have time for one more very brief question.
Darn.
Hi, I'm Ariel Petrovich. I'm a member of the faculty here as part of SISM at SPP. And I want to say first, thank you. This is a really excellent opportunity for a lot of our students and even for the faculty to see what it's like to do service rather than just study service. So I want to say thank you for doing that. So I kind of wanted to take a lot of what you were talking about, which is sort of possibilities for change and ways in which we might change the way human and just general intelligence is run. What would it mean to be a wild bill now? So, you know, if you could put it in current terms, what would that mean that you would do differently in terms of sort of intelligence on the Ukraine crisis right now, for example?
So, you know, so for those of you who know the story of Wild Bill Donovan, he's like my mentor. You know, I just find him amazing. You know, he served in the military, so he was very familiar with government service and military service. But, you know, he really wanted to, he really thought that what we needed in the World War II effort was, he actually copied an effort called the SOE, which was in the UK at the time. Winston Churchill had created this sort of paramilitary, extra intelligence group that both was really smart and really engaged in operations. And he thought we needed the same thing here. You know, he just wanted smart people that could win at a bar fight. And he got it. I mean, he really brought in PhDs and, you know, librarians who were information management experts. And by the way, he also had a ton of women. I mean, he was not, and for his day, of course, a lot of people think it's because he liked women, but whatever his case was, he actually brought in a lot of women, and he groomed them and he used them. I mean, Virginia Hall was perhaps this country's greatest asset during World War II, and also an incredible servant, by the way, who tried to become a State Department ambassador but was told she couldn't because she had a peg leg from, or whatever you call it, a prosthesis. Peg leg sounds not very, very sensitive, but she called him Cuthbert. But so Wild Bill just wanted this, and he had the ear of the president. So you need somebody who has the ear of your senior-most leader, who is trusted, who's a little bit of a rebel, but understands how government works. Wild Bill understood how government worked. So OSS actually was an element of the Department of Army, believe it or not. Nobody realizes that, but because he reported to the president. He got his funding through the Army, but it was because the president told him to get his funding. And he had the ability to hire and fire, and he had the ability to try things. Wild Bill was an incredible innovator and was willing to try anything. Like one time he tried to take honing pigeons, and he put little cameras on them to fly them over concentration camps, but they all dropped into the concentration camp because the cameras were so big. I feel really bad for those pigeons, but he was willing to try it, you know. It might have worked, who knew? And we need somebody like that. So somebody who understands government, has the trust and the ear of the president, has some flexibility to do some things that maybe we don't do before. So no, I mean, Herbert Hoover hated Wild Bill Donovan. The Navy hated Wild Bill. Everybody hated Wild Bill Donovan because he was special, but he got so much done. And I think we need something like that. And I was so hoping that INR might be that thing, but maybe it's something else. Maybe there's a Wild Ellen something, you know, who sits in Kansas City and has the ear of the president and tries the same thing. Let's try something. And again, I think that something needs to be parallel to what we're doing right now, because the greatest fear has always been, and the reason why the IC is very risk averse, but in a way that I completely understand, is because people's lives are at stake here. Let's be serious. You know, what we do is kind of important. And so there's a reason we are a little more risk averse than, say, other businesses and government. But if you have something that's working in parallel, I think with the right leader, with the ear of the president, with access to budget, willing to work with open source, I think working a parallel path, I think that's how you're going to see this change. Unless we go for a whole new, unless Congress gets its act together on this one and says we're going to recreate, you know, the what was it, the 1947 Defense Reorganization Act, unless they're going to do that, or we have another Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, which is actually informed by, you know, a lot of folks and just more time to actually look at what we need to do. But I just don't see that kind of change happening right now. So I think Wild Bill Donovan is the way to go, or Wild Karen Donovan. So.
Ellen, I have to say you covered so many things so well. My closing was simply going to be the only challenge I'm going to make to you is that I don't think we should be talking about a Wild Bill moment. It should be a Wild Ellen moment. But you stole my closing. So I really appreciate the links you made between your time here and this incredible career that you've had. I think it's important for our students, it's important for our faculty, it's certainly important for the dean. What we're doing here matters, and you made that connection beautifully. Thank you. I do have one question for you that I think was maybe the only thing you didn't cover. Did you ever get the golden retriever?
I did. I just got him. He's a COVID puppy.
Okay, it took a while, but you got there. You got the golden retriever. Thank you so much for being a part of our 40th anniversary. Thank you so much for the leadership you've been providing for the country, for the world. And to Catherine out there watching today, this is your legacy. Thank you.